400 years ago, London looked completely different from the modern city we know today. In the early 1600s, it had already become one of the largest cities in Europe, filled with tightly packed houses, narrow streets, and thousands of chimneys releasing smoke into the cold air. The smell of coal fires mixed with the scent of animals in the nearby river. Through the center of the city flowed the powerful River Thames, crowded with ships and boats carrying goods from distant lands. This river was the lifeline of London, connecting it to trade routes, wealth, and opportunity. Life on London's streets was noisy, chaotic, and often uncomfortable. The roads were muddy and narrow, crowded with merchants shouting to attract customers, horses pulling heavy carts, and travelers trying to move through the busy city. Waste was often thrown directly into the streets, making the environment unpleasant and sometimes dangerous. Yet despite these harsh conditions, London was a city full of energy and ambition. Traders, workers, and travelers from across England and Europe came here searching for opportunity and a better life. The River Thames itself was one of the busiest highways in the city. Boats of every size filled the water, from small ferries carrying passengers to large merchant ships loaded with timber, grain, cloth, and coal. For many Londoners, traveling by river was easier and faster than navigating the crowded streets. The Thames connected the city not only to England's countryside, but also to ports across Europe and the wider world. One of the most remarkable structures in the city was Old London Bridge. Unlike modern bridges, this one was covered with buildings. Tall houses and shops lined both sides of the bridge so closely that from a distance it looked less like a bridge and more like a street built across the river. People lived, worked, and traded here every day, turning the bridge into a small but crowded neighborhood above the flowing Thames. The bridge itself was constantly full of life. Merchants sold their goods from small shops, families lived in the houses above, and travelers slowly crossed the narrow roadway. Horses pulled carts through the crowd, while pedestrians squeezed between them. The noise of trade, conversation, and movement filled the air. For many people in London, the bridge was not just a place to cross the river, it was a place where everyday life happened. Beneath the bridge, the river could be extremely dangerous. The stone arches supporting the structure restricted the natural flow of water, creating powerful and unpredictable currents. Boats trying to pass through these narrow arches often struggled against the rushing water. Accidents were common, and only experienced boatmen could safely navigate this part of the Thames. The buildings on London Bridge rose several stories high, some even leaning outward over the road. The narrow passage between the houses created deep shadows along the bridge. Inside these crowded buildings lived families, shopkeepers, and workers who spent their lives surrounded by the constant movement of the city. Despite the risks of fire and the cramped conditions, people continued to live here for generations. During especially cold winters, something unusual sometimes happened. The powerful currents of the Thames could slow enough for the river to freeze. When this occurred, the frozen river became a gathering place for the people of London. Vendors set up stalls on the ice, and crowds walked across the frozen surface beneath the bridge. For a short time, the dangerous river transformed into a strange and lively winter market. Away from the crowded center of the city stood Buckingham House. In the late 17th century, it was simply a large private residence surrounded by gardens and open countryside. This peaceful location marked the outer edge of London, where the busy city slowly faded into fields and rural land. Centuries later, this quiet house would grow into what we now know as Buckingham Palace. Beyond the city limits, life was far calmer. Wide fields stretched across the landscape, small villages dotted the countryside, and the air was cleaner than in the crowded streets of London. For wealthy nobles and members of the royal court, these rural areas offered a welcome escape from the noise and pollution of the city. In September of 1666, disaster struck London. A small fire began in a bakery on a narrow street. At first, it seemed like a common accident, something that had happened many times before in a city built mostly from wood. But strong winds quickly spread the flames from building to building. Within hours, the fire began racing through the tightly packed streets. Wooden houses burned rapidly, and the flames jumped from roof to roof. Panicked residents rushed through the streets trying to save their belongings or escape the growing inferno. Soon, the fire grew into one of the greatest disasters in London's history.